Well.
How you doing, Alan? This is Brent.
Yes, caller ID. So I knew
Awesome.
it was you.
Well,
I'm fine. Fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing better than last week, that's for sure.
What went on last week?
Oh, like I said, I lost my voice. So, and when my job pertains to talking, it's kind of hard to communicate every other way than talking.
Well, that's right. Well, if you have to pause and take a drink or something, just go ahead.
Okay.
Or a
So,
throat lozenge or a shot of something.
absolutely. So, if you see me falling silent for a couple minutes, it's just me just trying to maintain my voice.
Got you.
But yeah, thank you again for having this conversation with me. I try to do a long format. Um, I'll try to keep it maybe just to an hour, and we'll just take it from there.
That could
Um,
work.
if you need to leave for any reason, just let me know, and we'll continue on another time or leave it as is. But
Okay, doke.
the topics I had in mind just to navigate our conversation, I'm not really looking at it as an interview, but more as a discussion, was the writing process, inspiration, environmentalism, and pulp culture at large.
In
Because
20, in 25 words or less. That's
in,
okay.
in 25 words or less, yeah. Well, Twitter has been prepping for this 250 characters.
That's all right. You ask whatever you want, Brent. I can talk for days on any subject.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. So when I just want to backtrack from our earlier conversation, that Monday was we were talking about the writing process and how no writing is done in a vacuum, even though we shut ourselves in a room for hours on end when we're writing. And I think the preconceptions of the writing really begins with experiences around us. And you were talking about a book, I think Outer Lands, where you
Into the out
had.
of.
Go ahead.
Into the out of.
Into the Out of, excuse me. Into the Out of, where you had initially an outline um, pre-written, and then you kind of tossed it aside when you actually went to the location during your travels and kind of restarted the whole process again. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience? Was it the culmination of the whole experience, or what was it that kind of prompted you, from what you had written before while you were traveling the airplane to after the trip?
Sure. My wife and I were set to go to Tanzania for 6 weeks in 1983 because an older fan of mine had kept bugging us to say, "Why don't you come visit? Why don't you come visit?" And at that time, Tanzania was even more difficult place to get around than it is now because it had basically a communist government. And so I kept bugging my wife in turn and said, "Look, this is a great opportunity. You stay with somebody local, drive around the country, which nobody does." And we eventually ended up going. But before we left, I had this idea to do some kind of detective mystery fantasy story based on, or at least centered on, the myths of East Africa. So I wrote out what was for me a fairly substantial outline, probably 5 or 6 pages. And I thought, well, I'll fill it in with local color. I'll meet this guy and see this piece of scenery. And we went there, and one thing after another just hit me that didn't fit my outline, but was much better than my outline. For example, on the road from Morogoro to Arusha, which is not a road that most tourists take, there's a huge escarpment, and there's an absolutely perfect evil face to natural rock formation, of course, on the side of the mountain. So that in the book became The Sorcerer in the Mountain. And we were driving through Tarangire National Park. There were no tourists at this time because the country was very difficult to get around. Everything was falling apart. And we came across a group of elephants, and the last elephant was the oldest elephant I've ever seen. When an elephant's tusks cross at the bottom, you know that's an old elephant. And you could tell just by looking at his skin, too. So that became basically the king of the elephants. And elephants walk very quietly. You really don't hear them. So I had this idea that this one particular elephant actually walked about a half a centimeter above the ground. But you couldn't tell that because nobody gets down flat on the ground and tries to look under an elephant's foot while it's walking around. Things like that. And then there was most of the people who do wood carving in East Africa or stone carving do things like Maasai heads and giraffes and hippos. But there's one tribe called the Makonde, and they must have had a session with Picasso and Chagall, or vice versa, because they have a whole mythology of their own based on these spirits called Shetani. It's very much like American Indian, Native American lore. And everything, every rock, every tree, every bush has its own spirit, and most of them are unpleasant. So the wood carvings tend to run unpleasant, but they are spectacularly beautiful. They're all done in black wood, we call that ebony. And I bought this really large, most of the carvings are smallish, very large Shetani carving called Spirits of the Earth from a shop in Arusha. It was up on a back shelf. And that actually became the basis, for the theme for the whole story, was that these Shetani spirits live in an alternate dimension, and they found a way through, and they are gradually infiltrating our world with an eye towards taking everything over, destroying us. And so all of these different factors, none of which I pre-saw, came together and all found a way into the book. So, for example, the Maasai. Are you familiar with the Maasai?
Not clearly, but...
Yeah, those are the tall warriors who, the men make these wigs and dye them with henna, and the women shave their heads. They have very stretched earlobes and remarkable jewelry.
Anyway. Okay, yeah, I know now, visually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're traditional cattle herders, but every tribe will pick the smartest kid in the tribe and everybody in the tribe will contribute money to send him off somewhere to get an education. And we were driving through near Morogoro, some part of Tanzania, and there was a Maasai warrior hitchhiking in full regalia with the lion spear and the whole bit. And our host, Bill Smythe, always picks up individual hitchhikers when he can, because certainly at that time there was no way for anybody to get around. And the guy gets in the back of the car and sits down next to my wife and myself, and we're looking at this figure out of National Geographic, and he says in this perfectly plummy Etonian accent, "So can you tell me, please, how is Mrs. Thatcher doing?" And he obviously was one of those kids who was sent off to school to learn. So my perspective on the Maasai was changed by my encounters with the Maasai, not like what you see on TV now. So that's how Into the Out of came about.
So you face the incongruity of expectation versus reality, where you had one preconceptions of what the Maasai was like, and then realizing with the individuals you met.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And unless you were familiar with the culture of the Maasai, which I was completely blank on before I went, you wouldn't pick up on something like that. So one of the three main characters in the book is a Maasai Laibon, or witch doctor we would call him, but he's a very educated man also. And had I proceeded without those encounters that I had, he probably would not have been. He would have been smart in a primitive native way, but without the gloss of an advanced education. Reality always trumps your imagination if you let yourself be exposed to it.
No, absolutely. I think that's why that famous saying is truth is stranger than fiction most of the time.
That's right. We try. Science fiction has to be stranger than truth sometimes, or you haven't got anything to write about.
Right.
But basically that holds true.
So that's very interesting to understand that this tribe isn't as isolated as the programs, the national programs, would let you believe and that these people are actually connected to the greater community at large.
That's right. Remember, this is almost 40 years ago. There's no internet. And I've been back to Africa several times since, and everybody's got a cell phone. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone. They do mobile banking. More and more people are getting solar setups for their houses that are off the grid. The world is changing so fast that it's really hard to keep ahead of it.
No, it's absolutely. It's a new connection, new technology. Speaking of technology, I know that you delve a lot of speculative fiction. How do you see, from what you imagined when you originally wrote, like the Humex Commonwealth, and the technology behind it, compared to the technology that you're seeing today? Do you see it like we're heading in that direction? Do you see technology far outpacing what you originally thought humans would be capable of achieving in a short amount of time?
Well, if we don't completely destroy the environment or blow ourselves up, the answer is yes. Arthur C. Clarke, who was a great ping pong player, by the way, once said that any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. And when I would teach classes, seminars, back when I would do that, and trying to explain science fiction to students, I would say, now imagine you're 200 years in the future. It's now, let's say, the year 2200. What would society be like? What would technology be like? What would life be like? They come up with, well, we have spaceships, we go to planets in the solar system, and maybe somebody's invented a warp drive. And after we got through with that, I'd say, now imagine it's 200 years ago. It's now 1800. And try to imagine yourself coming from year 2000 to the year 1800. How would you explain things to people about technology in the future? Well, you would show them maybe your cell phone. Let's just say for a moment that you've got battery power. They would probably shoot you as a witch, because it would be impossible to explain. It would simply look like magic. Well, where do the pictures come from? Where are the people hiding? Where are the voices coming from? How did you do calculations? How did you do calculations like that? What's this electricity thing all about anyway? You really have no basis for explaining 200-year in the future technology, and we don't now either. We may think we do, but we really don't. The other thing is that anytime somebody says something is impossible, usually isn't. I think Arthur said that too. The idea that faster than light travelers, maybe I should say travel to other solar systems, is impossible. You just don't say something is impossible. You can say it's impossible according to the current laws of physics as we understand them. But I always remember, you can go back and find wonderful quotes. The head of the Smithsonian Institution said, I believe it was in 1898, that he had proved conclusively through the use of higher mathematics that heavier than air flight was impossible. And a few years later, we have the Wright brothers. And so to say that something is impossible, I just don't do it. Never mind that I write science fiction, but I just don't do it. The idea, to go back to your question, that we can envision what technology is going to be like in 200 years, never mind in 400 years, is simply ridiculous. Nobody 200 years ago would have envisioned anything like a device that would allow you to access basically all the knowledge on Earth from a device you could carry in your pocket. I mean, that really is magic, if you think about it. Or that we would be sending back razor-sharp photos from Pluto because nobody had seen Pluto in 1800, or Neptune, or Uranus, or any of that. It's really difficult to do. So I tell students it's much easier to write about the technology 400 years in the future, say Star Trek or the Humex Commonwealth, than it is 50 years in the future. Because 50 years in the future is going to be based on technology that we have today, even though there will undoubtedly be developments we can't foresee. But if you go 400 years in the future, nobody can criticize you because So you go 400 years in the back. It is now 1620. And forget about it. There's no way you can explain. You couldn't even explain how your clothes were made in 1620. So you come up with stuff that you try to base on what we know of science today without getting entirely weird. If you don't want to do that, you do what Frank Herbert did in Dune, and you just have this group of adult humans who can warp, fold space, and you don't worry about the science. Just do it because that's not the basis of your story. And a lot of science fiction writers, if they're writing far future, it's like, well, okay, we have starships, and we're not going to bother wasting time explaining how they work. Star Trek's a good example. Any modern, really, science fiction films, let's say, or science fiction TV show, having people enter commands into their starship. They tap on a keyboard. And I can guarantee you, I can promise you that in 400 years there will be no keyboards. You will maybe have a little device like a snood. That's what Renaissance women wore over their hair. It had jewels in it. It was like basically a fancy hairnet. You'll basically have a fancy hairnet. You'll put it over your head and you will think. And the computer will pick up your thoughts and go from there. That's even if we need to do that. The other alternative will be, just like they said in Star Trek, you talk to the computer. It understands everything because we will have true artificial intelligence in that time span. Now you try to go, let's say, 1,000 years in the future. And you can't do it. You can't logically do it. You can't ask a man from the year 1020 to try to envision what the world of 2020 would be like. He simply hasn't got the necessary frames of reference. But you do the best you can. If you make it too alien, then your reader doesn't understand what you're talking about because they only have today's frame of reference. It's like trying to describe a real alien. If you make it too alien, then nobody understands what's going on. And then you have a film like, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which doesn't try to really doesn't try to explain it. Or you have a film, or more recent film, like The Arrival, where you have some really alien aliens, and trying to figure out even how they communicate is difficult, never mind what they might want. That's on the borderline of total incomprehensibility, and the general audience, the general film audience, didn't get that film, and you can hardly blame them.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of creators, when they go that route, when they lose that connectivity to the general audience, they kind of their works don't succeed as one that does connect. That there's traits that we can project on the aliens that we can make understand that empathetic connection for it.
That's right.
And even though, I think I read another body of work where the author said, well, what if that connection, that we feel intuitively as human beings is actually an aggressive sign for an alien and all the other stuff. So those are really, heavy questions to think about and to ask, if there's ever first contact with aliens, whether in our lifetime or descendants' lifetime, there's a lot of preconception of, are they like us? Will they be like us? And, it kind of, I guess these speculative novelists are saying, regardless of how that contact will occur, we hope optimistically that we build relationship instead of having, we have an external force, we bring our fight to the universe, and that's, I think that's why Star Trek, as one of those speculative films, like you mentioned, is very popular because that's bringing hope, like a spiritual awakening kind of deal.
Well, we better wake up, that's for sure.
Yeah.
There was a pretty good show on the Science Channel, it was a three-part series, 2-hour episodes, I don't even remember, a couple of years back, which attempted to deal with the question of first contact, that how humans would actually respond. From a purely scientific basis, I'm on it, and Neil Tyson's on it, and a bunch of other people. And that was a lot of fun to do, because the questions that the editors put to the interviewees were very, were based in science and psychology and how people might react. You probably find it on YouTube. It's a lot of fun to do. But as far as film goes, this is easier. The sort of thing we're talking about now is a lot easier to do in print than on a screen, because you can't really show thoughts on a screen so much. If everybody on the Enterprise was sitting around thinking quietly at the computer, you would have a very dull movie.
Right, and that's why the first the first film movie of Star Trek didn't go really well. I think that was the main.
Better than some people thought. Hang on one second, somebody's driving up. I think it's probably UPS or FedEx. We live at the end of a dead-end road. No, it's not. It's a very large Clear Creek Tree Service. I'm going to have to go downstairs and tell these people that they're lost.
Oh boy.
Or maybe they're not. Okay?
Okay.